Friends, hello. Today our guest is Denis Yelisevich, a well-known Ukrainian entrepreneur now in the United States of America. Welcome, Denis.
Hello.
I wanted to talk with you today about everything that's happening around Ukraine, about the deal that Trump is announcing, which could lead to peace or might not. What are your thoughts on the recent meetings between the American and Ukrainian delegations held yesterday and the day before?
Well, I've been advocating for peace ever since the failed Istanbul agreements. And of course, I hope for a ceasefire and truce to come as soon as possible and then for a full peace. That's why I'm relatively glad about yesterday's events, although I still have concerns about everything working out as planned.
Is peace even possible? For example, under Trump's approach, he might say, fine, I'll stop, I won't send weapons, I'll make a deal with Putin, we'll sign some formula or reach an agreement, maybe about rare earth metals or something else. Putin is capable of honoring agreements that in theory can be signed on paper.
Putin is capable of honoring agreements with Trump because the only person he is afraid of is Trump, maybe with Jinping too. Yes, Putin won't honor agreements with Zelensky, but will with Trump.
If you look at the entire chronology of actions, it's already been more than 3 years. You could say more than 1,100 days of war and a lot of casualties. Is it possible to assume that the scenario that happened in February 2022 could have been prevented?
I'm convinced that it could have been prevented here as well. Putin is clearly the aggressor who attacked Ukraine, but in this wave of general obscurantism in Ukraine, which now completely reminds me of how things have been happening in Russia in recent years. Well, in the Putin years, people don't want to understand that Zelensky also behaved wrongly in many situations.
Can we say that these more than 3 years have led to the destruction of Ukraine's economy? People who died, who ended up on the front lines or suffered from Russian aggression, missiles were hitting Ukraine. Can we say that this, well, has such an extremely negative scenario in general for the future of Ukraine? For example, even if Putin and Trump, Zelensky or another leader sign a deal, and let's suppose, even if we're talking about some territorial concessions, it will still to some extent lead to the future destruction of the Ukrainian economy, because this could scare off investors in the future, scare off some businessmen, and overall the population that has left Ukraine will not plan their future with Ukraine.
Look, my deep conviction is, first of all, let's talk about the economy since you asked. You can't destroy what doesn't exist. Ukraine's gross domestic product dropped from $200 billion before the war to $160 billion now, a tiny amount globally, so there's nothing to destroy. Besides, well, in general, if you look at it, you asked about the future, whether there will be the next stage of the war or the next war depends on Ukraine, not on Putin. That's mostly my opinion. Whether people return to Ukraine depends on Ukraine. As for those bombings, whether they are a bad foundation for the future, it's just a current loss. What happens next will depend on our actions, whether there are reforms, a new president, or a reformer. If Ukraine follows Milei's example in Argentina, it will be prosperous and avoid war. Yes, on smaller territories, possibly forever or for some years. But to throw ashes on your head and say that everything is lost and nothing will work out anymore, and that we are doomed to war, is a big mistake. In my view, everything depends on how we live, what we do, how Ukraine has lived through independence, and what the presidents have done. It was leading to some kind of catastrophe, not in the sense that now someone can attack us, not in that sense, but it was leading to something bad. There were signals, but no action was taken.
And in your opinion, who was the best president and who was the worst?
I can only name the worst one, Zelensky. Zelensky was the worst of the worst. You could also mention Yushchenko, but he was just a president who didn't get involved in anything. For Ukraine, considering the worst options, it's best not to get involved. Yushchenko didn't interfere with the economy or stir things up. He mainly promoted nationalist ideas like the Holodomor and the museum. He's extremely incompetent. I won't use the harsher words others who worked with him have used. But Zelensky is definitely the worst. He's worse than Yanukovych.
Yanukovych just ran away, abandoned everything, and simply left the country and ran off somewhere. But okay, if we go back to the current situation that Ukraine is in your opinion, what are the time frames? In what period could the war actually end and peace come to Ukraine?
So I am convinced that if everything goes according to Donald Trump's plan, then in just a month or a month and a half, there will be a ceasefire. There will be elections in the fall, then a new president will be elected, and after that, it will be signed by the new president. Preliminarily, the peace that has been agreed upon, I already think Trump, Putin.
All right, but this peace and the new elections with the participation of Volodymyr Zelensky, or maybe some new figures could appear. I saw some materials that say the Trump group is negotiating. The Trump group is negotiating with Poroshenko, with Timoshenko, and with some other people. Could some former politicians return, or might someone entirely new emerge on the horizon?
There will be many new, even sensational candidates, and I believe the number will set a record in Ukraine's history. I strongly suggest ignoring current polls and ratings. They're bought, and old television politics is outdated. Social networks and YouTube now hold real influence. As for Trump's negotiations with Poroshenko and Timoshenko, they are indeed taking place. But these are not negotiations about making one or the other president. These are negotiations about restraining Zelensky. If he doesn't behave properly, then it's possible that the parliament will announce his impeachment and create internal political pressure on him under the cover of Donald Trump. And regarding the old candidates, yes, of course, they will run as well. The political mothballs will also be running. We still have to go through this.
So it seems Trump doesn't intend to work with Zelensky, right? That's how I see it.
He won't work with him. Zelensky is already considered a washed-up pilot. Trump is currently working with available people to end the war. Afterward, elections will be held and a new president will be chosen. I'm sure Zelensky and his team will be sanctioned and prosecuted by the United States, but it will be handled politely. Zelensky can basically negotiate anything with Trump except for guarantees of his personal safety.
And then there's that famous scene when they were in the White House. Well, you could say they argued live on air. And when Zelensky left the White House, whether ceremoniously or not, without much pomp, although he was received very ceremoniously, he left the White House in a rather unceremonious way. And when there was massive solidarity from European politicians supporting Ukraine. Meanwhile, the previous day, the American Secretary of State met with the Ukrainian delegation to discuss a formula facing similar problems and negotiations as in Washington. But at the same time, everyone somehow supported what happened the day before, while what happened in Washington was somehow condemned by everyone. What's the logic behind this kind of policy?
Do you mean who condemned the issue? The issue?
Well, that's what I mean. After Zelensky left Washington, European politicians began criticizing Trump's behavior and the actions toward Ukraine. What are they doing with Ukraine? And the European politicians in London later met at the same time as they are now meeting in Riyadh, when the head of the State Department discussed things with the Ukrainian delegation. Basically, I think it was the same agreements they discussed in Washington or some kind of plan. I don't think the White House has backed down from its intentions toward Ukraine. And at the same time, well, it's clear that this was a move to support the agreements that had been reached. But what has changed in the past few days?
What changed is that Zelensky and his team were told that if he keeps going like this, he will face sanctions now. Besides that, there was a failure in the Kursk region, so Zelensky simply has nothing left to brag about. Moreover, the conditions have become tougher because the deal on minerals will be stricter than it was originally planned. It's already being rewritten, this is public, and it's stricter for the United States. So each of these new tricks, each new move by Zelensky makes the future worse for Ukraine, our position, the future deal, and everything else. As for the Europeans, they are war hawks who turned Zelensky into Churchill, this quasi-Churchill. I think he went to Washington to stir up that scandal right after his meeting with Ireland. And Britain is nearby, it's all the United Kingdom, and there are some intelligence agencies nearby, I'm convinced, that work with Zelensky, and he was just going to Trump to sabotage all of this. So Zelensky is not an independent figure, he follows the instructions of these European war hawks, and that's why everything is going so badly for Ukraine. Of course, if we look at it on a larger scale, if Zelensky had behaved differently in the White House, What is happening now would have happened back then. Perhaps by now there would already be a ceasefire, just without all these deteriorations for Ukraine, scandals, stress, shelling that have happened during this time, the loss of lives and so on.
All right, but today there is news that Ukraine is leaving the Kursk region. In your opinion, what was the purpose of such a scenario when the Ukrainian army enters the Kursk region? Was the goal to capture the nuclear power plant, or was it just some kind of public relations move?
Look, the Russians have their own values. Putin gave them those values. He uses this to fuel people who aren't very successful, let's say, and they rejoice in the fact that they have a nuclear submarine. So Zelensky built his own values in Ukraine. He needed to reinforce those values. We call this peremoga, meaning victory. They had to give the public a minor win to keep faith in Napoleon Zelensky. And with this, he got a temporary boost of +5 to his presidential rating. So it was a public relations stunt at the cost of the lives of our soldiers who died. According to my information, I talked to the military a lot, and there's real grief and trouble there. And of course, we won't know the truth anytime soon, but later we'll find out the truth and a lot of it. People will be shocked, so it's scary what's happening. It's all at the cost of our people's lives. Politics is being made on blood.
Are there any preliminary estimates at all of how many people have died on both sides during the entire conflict? No, there aren't.
I trust the numbers Trump cited in 1932. That's roughly 700,000 in Ukraine, killed, wounded, or missing.
So it turns out that in total, from both sides, there are more than 1 million missing or killed.
I think it's about 2 million, or at least 1.5 million on both sides combined.
From your perspective, how does the population of Ukraine feel about everything that's happening right now? Because I saw recently, well, in my opinion, some not very good videos that I've come across. For example, there are concerts happening in Kyiv, but when there's a war going on, I feel like there should be some sense of mourning. Yet at the same time, huge concerts are being held in Kyiv. I think it's not very ethical to hold such events during a war.
As I already said, Ukraine is consumed, infected by Russia with this widespread obscurantism and hypocrisy. And all this, plus with the Ogolsky syndrome, that is, people believe that holding concerts, going to concerts, supporting the war, there is a part of the population like that. They're a minority, but they're quite aggressive and active. So they think, especially men, like, I can go to a concert and support the war on social media. Let someone else fight in the trenches. I'm not going. They get outraged when the military recruitment office catches them, like at the Akenizi concert 6 months ago, when the office operated at Vakarchuk's concert. So this is all just widespread hypocrisy and obscurantism. Basically, terrible things are happening. I'm horrified at how my people have changed in just 2 years. The period was even shorter, actually. Propaganda just completely brainwashed people. Exactly the same thing happened as in Russia. I have to admit, Ukrainian propaganda now surpasses Russian propaganda. It's scary, but true.
Actually, when it comes to concerts, this topic really upset me. When the war had just started, and in Belarus, literally just a couple of weeks later, some artists were performing and filling up stadiums. I didn't get why Belarusians were filling up these concerts. The whole situation confused me. Even though you can see that neighboring cities are being bombed just a few dozen kilometers away and people don't understand what's happening. I think it was in Homyel or Minsk or somewhere nearby. Basically, Belarus is compact, and this happened in different cities. And when I saw this in Kyiv, of course, I had questions. How does this happen? Well, in general, people probably behave pretty much the same way in different countries.
In post-Soviet countries. That's just how our people are. Long before, maybe not long before, maybe a couple of years before, to be precise, not long before the start of the full-scale war, surveys in Ukraine showed 65% preferred Lukashenko as president over other foreign candidates. They needed a strong hand, a manager like that, someone powerful, as they thought. Then Zelensky came, who was much tougher than Lukashenko, because Lukashenko, well, of course, you know better. I won't claim to be an expert, but I'm convinced that Lukashenko deeply believes in what he's doing, because I found videos of him when he was 35 years old, and he was pretty much in the same paradigm back then. What message did Zelensky run on when he ran for office? I'll end the war, complete freedom, financial freedom, a liberal economy, and no one will bring up the language issue. We need universal reconciliation, peace, and to focus on Ukraine's prosperity. And now he, being my tribesman, having Jewish blood, put on a vishivanka, started speaking Ukrainian, and became nationalist #1 in Ukraine and is pushing for war. At the same time, according to my information, well, not just mine, but according to Espresso's information, his companies are still receiving royalties from the sale of their film products on the Russian market. This is unusual, and this person spoke with a Moscow accent before the war. Well, it's like a parade of hypocrisy. He's pretending, honestly speaking. So yes, in a Soviet way, our people are traumatized by this kind of virus, this idea that everyone needs a strong hand. Russians have Putin, and we can't break free yet. It's not working.
Well, Lukashenko, I remember, yes, he had high ratings, almost up to 80%. But on the morning of February 24, his ratings in Ukraine dropped to 2% or even less. People saw who Lukashenko really is, the one who let Putin use Belarus to attack Ukraine. Although Lukashenko has tried to wriggle out of it many times since then, he has interpreted it in different ways. But I'm convinced that if Lukashenko hadn't given Belarusian territory for the attack, such a full-scale war would hardly have been possible. Because Putin took advantage of the situation. He entered Ukrainian territory on those tanks. Lukashenko said that supposedly after the exercises, Putin was simply withdrawing his equipment along the shortest route. Well, he makes up a lot of things, of course, sometimes. How has the attitude of Ukrainian residents toward Belarus changed, in your opinion, or maybe based on some inside information?
You know, I'll speak for myself, for the people I communicate with, for my audience. That's what I read in the comments. We don't feel any hatred toward the people of Belarus, toward the country of Belarus itself. And even now, what am I saying? I'm not referring to Ukraine as a whole, but specifically to Zelensky's government. It's an important distinction. The same goes for Belarus. Yes, we have a negative attitude toward Lukashenko, but we have no complaints. I'm only referring to those nationalist and pseudo-nationalist types infected with obscurantism, not others. Maybe about 20% of them really do sincerely hate Belarus and project that onto your people, but most of them don't do that. It's a temporary misunderstanding caused by the war. After it ends, a few years will go by. The president in Belarus will eventually change, though it's not apparent yet. Thank you.
That's a very difficult question about whether a couple of years will pass. Is reconciliation between the warring sides possible? A couple of years after World War II, it took, well, several, maybe even decades for the warring countries to reconcile with each other. How much time will it take? And is reconciliation possible between Ukraine, Russia, or any of the other situations we're seeing today? Even within Ukrainian society, I see that there are different views and different opinions. Is internal national reconciliation possible among those with certain stances on issues?
This is actually an important question, and it needs to be divided into two parts. So look, I promote the point of view that we shouldn't show hostility or be filled with hatred toward any neighbors for the sake of Ukraine's future. But as for the reality of being friends, I think that's out of the question for a generation. Being neutral trading, there's no other choice because we can't just move Russia to another point on the globe geographically. It's a neighbor and will stay that way.
And for that,
in order to avoid war and to have economic growth, it's necessary to take a neutral position. That's why I understand that NATO never intended to accept us, and that caused problems. I support neutrality like Austria or Switzerland, that kind of neutrality, so that we just have neutral relations. Putin has caused so much grief and trouble that friendship isn't even possible to discuss now. You probably know that before the annexation of Crimea and Donbass, Russian television channels were already being broadcast in Ukraine. We watched the same television with our cable and digital packages providing all Russian channels. Everyone had it at home. Everyone watched the same shows, the same concerts, the same performers. And actually, I don't have any relatives, but you know, many Ukrainians have a huge number of relatives in Russia. People also quarreled. So Putin has caused terrible grief, terrible misfortune. I don't see friendship in the next generation. I don't know what should happen for that to change, unless Putin is gone in the near future. And I strongly recommend that no one wait for this or live for it, because you could spend your whole life waiting and nothing will come of it. You still need to live your own life. Think about yourself, Ukraine, or in my case, Belarus. But with Putin, that's impossible.
Well, yes, regarding television, I'll add that even some Ukrainian politicians have performed on Russian television channels with concerts. Yes, but in general, the situation is getting interesting now. On one hand, there is large-scale support from the European Union for Ukraine, military aid, humanitarian assistance, and other aspects. On the other hand, the European Union has proven over the past 3 to 4 years how actively it trades with Putin. They have introduced 16 packages of sanctions, and now they are already working on the 17th. At the same time, if you look at the official statistics, basically not much has changed, because they are also using proxies. Countries such as Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and possibly Turkey, where trade continues. What is this? How can we call it? Is it hypocrisy? Is it the inability to restructure their economy? What is it?
This is a very important question, and in Ukraine, many people don't understand it. So it's hypocrisy, but it's the kind of hypocrisy that I can't condemn. It's more like hypocrisy mixed with foolishness. But I can't condemn this because they're working for the good of their own countries. I mean, the Europeans, the European Union countries, the European Union, they decided, let's weaken Putin at Ukraine's expense. On one hand, the surplus there is 3 times what they paid Russia compared to their aid to Ukraine, costing Ukrainian lives and territory. Will weaken Putin, create some kind of buffer between us and Russia, Ukraine, tell them that someday we'll bring them into the European Union and NATO, but in reality, let's also consider the corruption of European leadership. Everyone perfectly understands that Putin is bribing the top echelon of European Union officials with cryptocurrency, and we know this by the names from the past. They've been recruited and people are there. It's a whole story. Maybe someday the facts will come out. For now, we can only guess about some of them, but with some, like Schroeder, these are already concrete facts. So, well, the situation is actually pretty scary. I forgot to add the European Union countries and Britain, so they have a task. So really, Russia is a threat. No one denies that, but why was such a, let's say, cynical method chosen? Let's do it together, even at the cost of Ukrainians and Ukraine. However, I strongly oppose Ukraine joining the European Union. I want Ukraine to develop like 19th century America, in the center of Europe. Economic freedom means getting rid of value-added tax, and if Ukraine reaches for the European Union, it will just be mega bureaucracy multiplied by our corruption, and people will leave for good. And people just don't understand why a European or Ukrainian entrepreneur should even work in Ukraine, endure all the horrors of reality, and also the threat from Putin if we become members of the European Union, instead of just going to neighboring Poland where there's an honest court, where the system is already established, everything works, everything is great, and adaptation is easy. What advantage does Ukraine have? Otherwise, we won't have a chance. As for security, I already said that's a separate issue. It's unfair. It's all Ursula, the hawks, warmongers, leftists, Macron, Scholz. For me, all of this is unacceptable. But our people have been hooked on it. They still look to the European Union, NATO. Half their lives passed hoping, but only war came. That's what I'm working on YouTube. Convincing people is tough, even with facts and arguments. It works, but only on a small number of people.
I noticed the European Union's hypocrisy toward Belarus. Since 2020, can you imagine, for 4 or 5 years, they haven't been able to solve a very small problem. They can't free the 1,400 political prisoners there. In Belarus, this is a minor issue that could be fixed if they made an effort. But what are they doing? They regularly, periodically, once a month or at some other interval, post photos with political prisoners. Ursula Metsola or others declare, "We support Belarus, its people, and political prisoners." That's where their efforts to free the hostages stop. If they truly wanted to, I believe they could have resolved this much earlier. If someone acts, he reaches his goal. If they can't resolve the issue of freeing a small group of prisoners, then how can they possibly resolve a global conflict? That means they're just not interested, yet they still trade with Putin and Lukashenko and profit from it. And then they smile and say, "We stand with your people." That's hypocrisy, I think.
I completely agree. But you see, they've always traded with Putin. I'm someone who supported Donald Trump for a long time. It was great when Trump once put Stoltenberg, the former NATO Secretary General, in his place. He said, you built up Russia, paid them huge sums for energy, and now want us to protect you. Shouldn't you contribute properly? 5% of gross domestic product to NATO. I mean, that's completely illogical. Europe is in bad shape and Trump should help fix it. I also agree with your point about Belarus. So they chose, let's be honest, not very successful countries for now, Ukraine and Belarus. Let's use them to somehow defend ourselves from Putin with our right hand and trade with him with our left. This is just, well, something is going wrong. Something is not normal. That's one of the reasons why I like James David Vance's speech, the Munich speech by the United States Vice President. Because right now we see this, just on the same topic, what's happening in Romania. They are not allowing this candidate, although I'll be honest with you, I haven't even looked at his biography. I know he's pro-Russian, and in my understanding as a libertarian, that's what I know. It's not normal when someone is banned from running in Brussels just because someone put some ads on TikTok. If people voted for him, Romanian citizens, then, well, let's say if they're idiots, if he's bad, they're idiots, but it's their choice, and they have to deal with the consequences. No, Brussels made the choice. Now they're even thinking about banning TikTok. Are these Soviet Union style methods? A dictatorship is still a dictatorship, you know, like they say, communism with a human face. This is just a dictatorship with a human face. We violate rights only in extreme cases, like when Trump's Twitter and Facebook accounts were taken down. They didn't allow it here in Romania. If Maya Sandu hadn't won in Moldova, I'm sure they wouldn't have recognized those elections either and would have taken action. I can't accept this. I really dislike it.
Is the European Union actually aiding Ukraine? Right now, over the past 3 years, in terms of military equipment, or is it more like some kind of public relations?
Is it mainly public relations? No, there is some help too. I can't say that they're not doing anything, but it's also kind of sneaky because they give just enough so they don't lose, but not enough for victory. No one in their right mind can even talk about defeating Russia militarily, so they give you just enough so you don't lose. Here you go, just so you don't lose. They've burdened Zelensky with loans. Britain isn't in the European Union now, but Starmer recently went there. Now here's a €3 billion loan. And here's another loan for you. Go to the king in Spain where he meets the king. You're Churchill, you're great. Just keep going. As an actor, it's like, look how the kings greet me. I'm the best. Basically, Europe and the American Democrats raised a dictator, Zelensky. And now there's another full-fledged dictator in the post-Soviet space. I discussed this, which is why I was the first to go into political exile. I began broadcasting on YouTube at the war's start, sharing very different views. I supported it as long as the government was acting properly, and we were all on the same page with the government. After we fought off Putin, thanks to the army's heroism, within months the government started acting as before, but even worse. And then Zelensky felt like, I can do anything, Europe lets me get away with everything. They told him, basically, do whatever you want there, just keep fighting, fight, do whatever you want, just keep fighting. That's exactly what Putin did, and that's what happened. While the whole world is already watching how the Ukrainian TCC acts, setting people on fire in their cars, calling them up to the army, nobody wants to go fight. It's been a non-stop nightmare. I won't repeat what happened in Belarus since you've already been told.
Well, yes, with Putin's help, Lukashenko was able to clear the field and continues to arrest people in the country every day, and a lot of people have left the country. And of course, the European Union kind of opened its doors, but I think they opened them because they had a problem, including a demographic one, and they needed workers. And that was also one of the reasons why Europe opened its doors to Belarusian companies, which now pay taxes in different countries and bring income to those budgets. Well, in this case, some interests of these European countries and politicians might have coincided, and maybe it wasn't just moral principles at the forefront, especially if you look at the actions they're taking now. You mentioned experiencing persecution, or that it still happens. How common is this in Ukraine now? For those who might have their own point of view, and it doesn't always coincide with the official one,
this has reached a wild scale. And you see, in Ukraine right now, it's not about you personally broadcasting to yourself. Repression is expected. They wiped out all information with the help of special services. The problem is that someone with just a few followers posts or reposts, and then someone shows up at their home. The security service of Ukraine storms in, searches, and then it's pretrial detention or house arrest. That's what's scary. This is Putinism, the Russian world, and the core of the complaint. For me, and for people like me, there aren't many of us who are active, but the truth is that Zelensky has built the same Russian world, just under the Ukrainian flag, without Putin. He works completely according to his playbook from start to finish. They likely haven't passed the foreign agent law to avoid being too obvious, preferring to quietly repress people. Now they're even sanctioning their own citizens. something unheard of elsewhere. Even Lukashenko does this to his people.
Belarus passed a law allowing citizens to lose their citizenship. Those who have some special status, Lukashenko.
Zelensky is revoking citizenship via the National Security and Defense Council. I mean, these are unbelievable things. Freedom of speech no longer exists in Ukraine. We had a lot of problems in Ukraine. There were many things we couldn't achieve. And I'll say it again, I can't call us a successful country, but we had something like democracy, we had freedom of speech. And even under Poroshenko, whom I'm not a supporter of, I didn't vote for him. I have to admit, Poroshenko held elections, transferred power, and everything was peaceful. Zelensky is just something else. He's something else.
If presidential elections are held in Ukraine and Zelensky either doesn't run or loses, where will he go, or will he stay, or what will his future be?
Well, at first there was some information that it would be London, since he closely cooperates with Britain, and well, London is known for that. They can shelter dictators if they come with a lot of money. And Zelensky and Yermak have huge amounts of money now, billions of real dollars in cryptocurrency and cash in accounts. Based on my latest information, they're focusing more on Arab countries, have moved their capital there, built strong connections, and now hold meetings in Arab countries. This isn't accidental. That's why I can hardly imagine such an option. But at the same time, there's information that Zelensky has his own plan. That's what he wants. He knows he won't be president. He wants to bring his faction into parliament, lead it, and keep fighting in politics. He believes in his political future. I honestly can't imagine how he could walk down the street in Kiev, in Ukraine, after everything he's done. I can't imagine that. I don't know how it will be in his mind. But on the other hand, I think at the final stage, Trump will tell him, you're not running in the elections. I mean, he'll just forbid him from running. Because believe me, I know this firsthand. But in Trump's team, everyone is just allergic to Zelensky. They openly despise him here.
They don't like him. That's how it seemed to me, probably. One of the reasons why Trump doesn't like Zelensky lies in the events of 2019, when Trump asked Zelensky to help him investigate the case against Biden, and Zelensky didn't really help him much back then. And there was a story that eventually led to Trump's impeachment. Could that have somehow affected their current relationship as well?
Of course, that was the first and most important stage. Since then, he hasn't liked Zelensky, and after that, his rudeness continued throughout everything that happened. And what happened in the Oval Office 11 days ago was just the peak of it all. That was it. But look, today we have here in Congress a congresswoman of Ukrainian origin from Kyiv, Victoria Spats. Today I posted myself everywhere. She said on American television that if Ukrainians re-elect Zelensky, they'll lose all remaining Ukrainian territories. She spoke directly. Due to her allergy, she even has assistants say Zelensky's last name for her. They said when someone comes from the Ukrainian side, everyone knows it's Vario. Besides, I think they have such powerful special services. They have more information than I do. This is corruption and the mafia, people profiting from war, who ruined a beautiful country in Europe and helped Putin destroy it. Zelensky neither tried to stop the war nor prepared the country. The army, generals, and Ukrainian people did everything. And now we've come to a catastrophe, but there are still chances to get out of this situation. For 2 years, since the skipped parliamentary and presidential elections, I have consistently said Ukraine needs elections and believe they should have happened during wartime, even with electronic voting. Ask Elon Musk. He could help, given his capabilities with live mode on the social network EKS. We would have seen the results. Believe me, that was just an excuse. Here are the elections. I'm waiting for the elections, not for the end of the war. I'm waiting for the elections more.
If you've probably seen that movie, Madam Secretary, it was probably 2014 or 2015, maybe 2016. And there's a scene there that describes the war in Ukraine, describing Oleg Zelensky, who is running and hiding in the forests. Can we assume that there is some kind of scenario that was written in advance by someone? Well, because it's hard to come up with such coincidences at all.
Yes, I think this is what was planned by the Democratic Party. I think this is what this United States Agency for International Development, this whole Soros structure, let's say, probably I'm Soros, number one. All of this was basically planned. It's a global plan, not a conspiracy theory. I don't have this or obsess over it, but I watched these 3 episodes. You could honestly go crazy watching something like this, excuse me. It's just that the last names match, that's all. There's a nationalist as the main character, then a prototype of Yermak, and then the territory is almost exactly along the same line where everything is happening today, the line of demarcation. And of course, yes, they called it something like broad autonomy back then. Something like that is ahead of us.
How influential were those organizations in Ukraine? I just checked the situation in Belarus. I even wrote an article about how Western and actually any foreign organizations have been funding Belarusian special services for 30 years. Probably the opposition in Belarus was under Lukashenko's control, the so-called systemic opposition, but in reality, it didn't influence anything at all. They were getting money from the West, or sometimes even some Russian funds would throw them a few pennies, and that money, most of it was stolen, some of it got worse. The KGB security service got involved, and they didn't fight against Lukashenko at all. And now that funding from the country, United States Agency for International Development, and other American organizations has been cut off, a scandal broke out in the Belarusian opposition, which was being supported by these organizations. They started shouting that they needed money. Some media, about 400 journalists, some kind of spirit appeared, whom nobody knows. Well, how influential was this story in Ukraine, and how dependent was Ukrainian civil society on this kind of funding?
I'm not impressionable. I know a lot about how Ukraine works. It took me a whole day to recover when I found out all the details. It was unbelievable. $10 billion a year. 90 media outlets were under yes said. That is, if you imagine that the war didn't happen. I stayed in Kiev, created a libertarian party, or joined an existing one, or maybe ran for president myself, like the libertarian Milei did in Argentina, something like that. You have no chance. You'll get trampled and have already lost, like playing cards with cheaters and no hope of winning. That is, all the media are under East Side's control, as well as the politicians. And that's huge money without taxes, without anything. Well, we have someone like that over there, you know? He's considered a powerful investigator, an investigative journalist, biggest, and information surfaced online that he was paid $400,000 for 40 videos. That's, well, I'll tell you this, not bad, not bad. And of course, they would never interview someone of my caliber. I don't mean just me, but someone of my caliber. They don't need reforms, just new ideas. They'll last forever. The fight against corruption, it's just that the more they fight corruption, the more corruption there is in Ukraine. You need to drain the swamp, close ministries, and cut government officials. But what they do is there's Petrov, there's Sidorov. Petrov gets caught stealing, so they put Sidorov in his place. Then Sidorov gets caught stealing, so they put Petrenko in. And they've been shuffling them like this for 30 years. How has Yesaid worked since 1992? It turns out that all this time we've been living without any chances, meaning it was all part of a script and nobody wanted a successful Ukraine. And Belarus, I believe they considered it from the start as well. You know, I think it's also our fault, because if we had been more active, if the 3PHs had been more cooperative, if we had united more easily with the power of good, let's call it that, then they'd realize it won't work so easily. But right now, they see it another way. They swallowed it, the convict, the clown, the red director, and even Kuchma in our case. Yeah, listen, they don't want to live free, so let's go ahead and carry out our own plan here, weaken Russia, and let's also take a step back. And at the United States-Russia summit in Geneva, which happened just before the war, Biden and Putin must have had some kind of conversation. And how Obama, without a single shot, told them to give it up. Crimea and Donbass didn't resist at all. So basically, I hope when some American insider or Trump's team declassifies all this to destroy the Democrats before the next elections, we'll be shocked. They stole years of our lives from us personally, and years of success from our countries. It's terrible. It's horrible. And I was so happy, and you know, I have the moral high ground because I'm a supporter of Trump. Moscow has been consistent for a long time, and now it's in Ukraine. Many people changed sides to support them, but I showed people, look, they shut down the United States of America, and now all these journalists went to the president's office to ask for money. And some of them were taken in. The biggest, the most large-scale ones. Who gets the views? But now at least there's a chance you'll be heard. They just brainwashed people. Plus the language issue and more. So basically, let's have more government in people's lives, more ministries, more different commissions, more of everything, but just not what we actually need. It was technically impossible to reform Ukraine, how much conflict existed. The government placed its own people there, and they are still there to this day, in the supervisory boards of huge state corporations, for example, Ukrzaliznytsia, which is the railway. But if you consider that Ukraine is a huge country, can you imagine how much money is involved? And there's corruption on top of corruption there, for example. I'm telling you, there are so many cases like that. And basically, there was just no chance. Only now, with the arrival of Trump, do we have some kind of chance. And in Belarus, I think you also have a dictator who has taken root, and you don't have a change of power. It's in our history. We're about to elect Zelensky, but I feel sorry for Belarus. I think that maybe our post-war reforms will have a positive impact on you.
Who will rebuild Ukraine? It feels like the deal that Trump is offering. I suspect that this deal is also aimed at bringing investments into Ukraine, because when large corporations come in, it sends a signal to other smaller and medium-sized companies to come and invest as well.
You see, we need to clarify the word corporation, because everyone knows about BlackRock, for example, or a corporation like Exxon or Shell, which would be involved in developing natural resources, the ones Trump talks about. That's the kind of corporation that wouldn't harm anyone. When discussing financial speculators, that's a different matter. But regarding American capital, you're right. It will come in along with European capital, as has always happened in history. And believe me, the domestic Ukrainian investor is also very significant. It's tens of billions of dollars. First, you need to interest the domestic investor so that others will invest as well. Those who left have returned. I'm not worried at all about the restoration of Ukraine. I don't have such concerns. We can't achieve anything there if reforms are happening. I know what Ukraine's shadow market is like, with taxes and bureaucracy crushing everything. Ukraine is a wonderful country. You can probably say the same about yours. Kyiv is the best city in the world for me, not just because it's my homeland, but because I truly believe in its potential. I kind of logically justify why that's the case. We have incredible things. Before we get swallowed up by European democracy, before Putin takes us over, and before our internal enemy, our officials, are consumed by corruption, we need a reformist president. We need something completely different. I'm trying to reach out to the people, to the public, but I'll say it again, it's hard, very hard. There are very few active people who want to get involved.
But after that, after those 3 years of this whole military campaign that's going on now, a lot of people have left Ukraine, a lot of entrepreneurs and proactive people have left. It feels like they are planning to come back, or will some of them actually try to settle down and legalize themselves in other countries, in European countries? I know that many went to Portugal and Spain, and they feel pretty comfortable there.
We can do that as well. Referring back to your question about the future, will there be war in Ukraine and also there? Future outcomes will depend on the new president and his proposed reforms. First, people should be granted amnesty, and those the government believes left the country improperly should be treated like those who went to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Well, this is for those who deserted, who left the front, an overall amnesty, a general national truce, and then the conditions come next. So you see, I can already see these ideas forming in the minds of our officials. They believe offering a handout like $100 will bring people back, but that's nonsense. That won't work. You need low taxes, no bureaucracy, and non-interfering law enforcement and security services. Freedom of speech lets you express yourself and feel human. This democratic process encourages people to return on their own. But I'm with you here. If that's what you were hinting at, then I agree. 70 won't come back. Almost all the examples are from the lives of my acquaintances, my followers. They send me stories every day in the Telegram bot. Imagine a family has left. Their child attends kindergarten in Poland, they're working and have a Polish mortgage. In Ukraine, there is no mortgage market, meaning there is no mortgage at all as a financial instrument in Ukraine. They have everything there. People recovered in 2 years, which is essential. How do you love Ukraine? They say they love it here as guests, but not for life, which really upsets me. I now live in one of the world's best cities, but I long to go home and am just waiting for Zelensky's regime to end. I never planned to leave. During the war, I rebuilt my business and helped the army. I'm not just praising myself. Many other small and medium-sized entrepreneurs are involved too. But now it's scary. And you understand what the Territorial Recruitment Center is doing is causing scandals. So just so your audience understands, every day the government is turning more and more Ukrainians against itself. Every day a person picks up their phone, opens their feed, lawlessness, lawlessness, forget it. But on the contrary, I go on air. People, don't project all of this onto Ukraine. It's all Zelensky's fault. All the negativity is on him. Ukraine as a country is wonderful. It's not to blame. We just need to choose the right president.
How strong were the institutions of power in Ukraine before the war, the Verkhovna Rada, the judicial system? How resilient were they to such kinds of upheavals, and how useful can these institutions of power be for the period of reforms in Ukraine?
Look, the institutions of power and the security forces have always been strong in relation to their own people. To crush an entrepreneur, a grandmother selling strawberries in an underpass, or an ordinary citizen, they're always strong here, but not with processes, so it's important to distinguish between them. If you're talking about the war, I'm telling you directly, as someone who has spoken with more than one member of parliament, they were unsure what to do, only given envelopes with instructions like close the windows, turn on your phone, listen to authorities. As an ordinary citizen, no one knew what to do during the first 3 days because no one was prepared for the war. There's no hope here, and there's no point in talking about it because Ukraine needs to start from scratch. Why do I say a new president, new parliament, a fresh start? There's no point discussing the past. It was all set up. I call it a person for the state, not the state for the person, well, for the citizen. There's no point in considering it. It's a big, unwieldy, overly bureaucratic, completely corrupt state. And I just want to tell people, look, right now, Mass Department in America is exposing what was happening in America. 20 million dead souls have been uncovered in America. Millions of pensioners are 360 or 120 years old. There was embezzlement of the pension fund in America. Here, stealing from a taxpayer is nearly impossible. They'd never even think of that. You'd have to be at the very top for it. And that's here. What can we say about post-Soviet countries? If you dig into Ukraine and Belarus, you could be shocked by the amounts there. I won't discuss Ukraine. It's my country and unbelievable. So talking about this pointless stuff isn't worth it. They forgot the basics. Everything needs to be done completely differently.
Ukraine has mentally left the Soviet Union. I mean, the deep-rooted population, but still, like in Belarus, some people, just a little, still live in the old Soviet Union because they walk along Lenin streets. Well, there was de-Leninization in Ukraine, but not in Belarus, and there you have Soviet Street, Sovietskaya, Communist Street, Kirovaya, all those Soviet figures. In most cities of Belarus, they dominate, and people are in that space, including mentally, they remain there. Lukashenko seems stuck in the 1970s to them, while Ukrainian society has moved past the Soviet era.
No, it hasn't, but many in other post-Soviet countries have. I talk to people and listen, but I used to think society had moved on. That's a big misconception. I dislike communists and Bolsheviks, but street names never really bothered me. We had a public relations focused decommunization, and money was siphoned off since renaming streets involves lots of paperwork, new signs, and expenses. Demolishing a monument is one thing if it's Lenin, but when it's Pushkin or Vysotsky, it feels like we need our own figures first. Maybe we should honor someone ourselves before tearing down their monuments. Why do it just for the sake of it? So this kind of nonsense exists. We haven't really moved away from the Soviet mentality. And what's even scarier is that there's something worse than the Soviet mentality, a mutating Soviet mentality. In Ukraine, 20 to 25-year-olds show a changed Soviet mentality and believe they're free. But in reality, right now during the war, they've absorbed this semi-nationalist, semi-Soviet ideology. I'm not joking. They encourage taking everything from everyone and splitting it up. Well, can a 20-year-old person who isn't communist or Soviet-minded really do that? They're the same Soviets, just in a mutated form that uses social networks and products of capitalism. So if the answer is no, at least half the population is still mentally in the Soviet era. We've already discussed this today. Craving a strong leader or firm manager is also a Soviet mentality. Even now, we still think this way, even about local elections like for mayor. You know, we need a strong manager. Most often you'll hear that we need a strong manager.
Belarus is the same, a strong manager. He has been in power for 31 years and he's constantly dealing with cows and pigs. And all of this is at the same level. He is in Belarus in terms of gross domestic product per capita, ranking fourth from the bottom among European countries by gross domestic product per capita. Ukraine, of course, is lower, but for certain reasons right now. So, well, a strong manager has shown his effectiveness. If we go back once again to the deal that might happen in the near future, in your opinion, will Ukraine have to sacrifice part of the territory that Putin has occupied, or is there some other formula?
Well, to sacrifice. Let's clarify. Ukraine doesn't see these as Russian territories, but let's say we temporarily give them up. Temporarily giving them up means a territorial compromise will definitely happen. For 2.5 years, it was obvious. It was just propaganda. Yes, we'll have to temporarily give them up, but not recognize them as Russian, and none of the civilized countries will recognize them as Russian.
But Putin says that he wants them according to the administrative borders. Today, the front line runs a little further. Does this mean that a compromise formula might imply that some more territories will have to be temporarily given up?
No, we won't have to give up what we control now. I don't believe that. I don't take it seriously. What Putin, Lavrov, Peskov say there, they are, anyone but idiots. They are experienced negotiators, tough negotiators, just like Trump. And of course, they will play hardball. They will go to the press and make demands and ask for the maximum, showing how uncompromising they are. When will trilateral negotiations actually begin? For example, whether it's Zelensky, Yermak, Putin, Trump, or others representing these three countries, there will be a serious, truly compromising conversation. Trump said both sides may leave the table somewhat or even very dissatisfied. That's what I believe. That's pretty much how it's going to be.
And is it even possible for Putin and Zelensky to meet at the same table? It seems to me that's not really possible.
Probably not Zelensky specifically, though. I don't know what leverage Trump could use here. First, Zelensky has refused to negotiate himself, and that's a fact, not Putin's propaganda. This document is on the National Security and Defense Council website. He adopted it. He forbade himself. And now Putin publicly mocks him and tells Trump, I'll sit down with him at the negotiating table, but let him legally allow himself to do it, kind of humiliating him. Remember, you once forbade yourself, but now you allow it because you were contradicted and put in a position. Sadly, that's what's happening. Even though I dislike Zelensky, I don't like this. My country is being somewhat shamed. Everything could be resolved without Zelensky. Look, yesterday in Saudi Arabia, Yermak held negotiations. Who is actually the real president of Ukraine?
Zelensky was there, but either wasn't allowed into the negotiations or chose not to join. There was some story about it, right?
He didn't fly. He didn't go there.
But he wasn't there. I thought so too.
He was expected, but they announced last minute he wouldn't go.
Well, but I don't believe it.
That Zelensky will sign it, that's another story. I don't believe that Zelensky will put his signature. Exactly, he will avoid that.
That is, he will distance himself as much as possible from signing any peace agreement so as not to bear any legal responsibility for this document.
Political. So it will be Yermak who signs, or Syrskyi, our head of the armed forces. I don't know how it works under international law. Or maybe our Minister of Foreign Affairs, something like that. Or the new president, as I already said, maybe just a ceasefire, stable elections, and then the new president will sign. Well, I don't see anything terrible about this because we all remember very well in Israel what kind of war there was with Egypt. And Golda Meir, who is attributed with a fake phrase, if someone comes to kill you, and all that stuff that's dramatically circulating online. Golda Meir, she sat and laughed with the president of Egypt after the terrible war, and they exchanged gifts with each other. I'm just saying this to my audience, and my people need to get out of this propaganda paradigm. Stop absorbing these movie-like scenarios. Real life is complicated. Israel is currently negotiating with terrorists, specifically Hamas, despite the saying that you don't negotiate with terrorists. That's why we'll have to negotiate with the terrorists, Putin and everyone else, make peace, sign agreements, and there's no need to blame anyone for that. The Ukrainian opposition is already acting dishonestly. Even before our talk, I can see them coming out. We prohibit Zelensky from making territorial concessions or altering the path toward NATO and the European Union. So this is a dirty political game. I call it mentally retarded. This isn't about Ukraine. It's about personal success in politics, about personal power.
Today is the 85th anniversary of the end of the Soviet-Finnish War. As a result, Finland lost about 10–11% of its territory, but preserved its statehood. The Soviet Union got some of what it wanted. Well, this also shows that wars always end with some kind of agreement. Most wars in human history ended with some piece of paper, some negotiation process. Someone would speak, someone would get something, but mostly everyone lost. Usually the result was casualties and destruction. From a demographic point of view, if you look at Ukraine's demographic pyramid, I saw that now they're already recruiting for the war, sending or planning to send 18-year-old guys. Does this mean that in 15, 20 years, Ukraine will have a very serious demographic problem? To be continued.
Definitely. Yes, this is already a proven fact by the numbers. A demographic problem exists. Just look at the upper grades in schools now. There are almost no boys left. Girls dominate. It's about 70 to 30. That's already a fact. That's it. We still have a long way to go to deal with and fix this situation, but it all needs to be done. The issues we've already discussed today about the economy, about bringing people back, about the future, and so on. And here I have to say that a major mistake is being made, but it's not a mistake. These are deliberate actions. They're trying to militarize society right now. A cult of death. They're trying to impose these negative tendencies like, let's start preparing kids to fight from 7th grade. Let's teach them to operate drones in schools. That's not what we need. Learning to operate drones should be a conscious choice. For professionals aiming to earn money or serve their country, but it's being forced on children. In Palestine, this is done from age 2 and see the results. Meanwhile, Israel, though surrounded by enemies, raises its children with love and celebrates Israel's successes. So yes, thank you. Terrible things are happening here.
What major reforms does Ukraine need, in your opinion? To conclude our conversation, what changes would you like to see in Ukraine, in your opinion? It's simply necessary for the country to become successful, prosperous, and wealthy. Thank you.
Globally, nothing can be reformed. Everything must start from scratch in an understandable way. Definitely the lowest taxes in the world, definitely the abolition of value-added tax, thank you, and definitely judicial reform. I support British law, I support introducing case law in Ukraine, reducing the government apparatus by 70%. That is, the state shouldn't be the only thing in a person's life. I'm a libertarian, I'm a supporter. Limit the state's role to 3 functions: internal security, police; external security, army; and arbitration, courts and anti-monopoly committee. Everything else is done by the private sector. Everything else is derivative. This is the foundation and the judicial program. The reform is published. But what Javier is doing, Milei, Trump to some extent in America, this must be done quickly in Ukraine, and it's possible.
And there is a demand in Ukrainian society and a team of people who can make it happen today.
The team isn't an issue, but the demand is. As I already told you, most of them still need a firm hand, or they want beautiful fairy tales. Not everyone right now, or rather most people, are not ready yet to face reality, to admit that there is a problem. Just as an alcoholic or drug addict must admit their condition and begin treatment after diagnosis, they're still trying. No, I'm not a drug addict or alcoholic. I'm healthy. I don't want or need treatment. It's a childish attitude. It's the same for kids around 12 or 13. They're no longer children, but not yet adults, and aren't fully responsible for their actions. But in our case, something terrible happened. A war broke out, and I thought that people would finally wise up. No, it didn't affect them at all. To be continued.
Well, I wish Ukraine and the Ukrainian people the courage to get through this period and for peace to come as soon as possible. Any peace is better than war, which is absolutely true. And territories can be regained when the country is developing successfully, when it has a strong army, a strong economy, and a strong civil society. I think that's important. Such a principle is necessary for the state to survive, to develop, and to be attractive not only to its own citizens, but also to foreigners in general. Dennis, thank you very much for your feedback. I'm sure it's very useful for people to think and reflect on what's happening in Ukraine today from different points of view.
Thank you very much.